Hello and welcome to the Parents Guide. This is where you'll find out what's going on in schools and hear some of the key issues being discussed from the parent's point of view. If you have school-aged children, this programme is for you. We'll be focusing on English and maths in secondary schools with two parents, Maggie Hattersley and Elaine Tones.
Hello.
Hello.
We're also joined by an advisor with many years' experience in secondary education, Simon Gibbons.
Hello.
We've been looking at some programmes from Teachers TV and we'll be showing some extracts during our discussion. These programmes were made for teachers, but they also open up a window for parents to look into classrooms and see what's going on in schools today. Our first extract from Eastleigh Community School in East London shows an exceptional teacher, Philip Beadle, teaching poetry to Year 11 students on the theme of war, specifically the war in Iraq compared to Vietnam. His lesson is structured through a series of questions and answers.
There was no light, there is no light, there will never be any light. The airships blackened our world. 2. Nature, like love, you never miss it till it's gone. 3. There were no hands left to take it into. 4. As hard as the gold were their hearts, shiny and pleasant on the outside, hard and raw in the centre.
That's superb. I'd like there is. Could you read the first one out again? Could you read your first response out again? Because I thought that was really special.
There was no light, there is no light, there will never be any light. The airships blackened our world.
Yeah, the beauty of it is that this, that wasn't an enormously discursive lesson, so that tomorrow morning when I get in at 7 o'clock, I'll be able to judge how well it went by marking the books. Rahima's response, I think, appeared to be really quite strong. Like, that's the absolute joy of teaching poetry, is that kids get to write their own poetry, and their souls are every bit as valid as an adult soul, and probably a bit more free in their expression. Where is she? So the questions. Did you dream of seeing daylight during the war? Sir, dreaming is only for those with simple lives, lives which we have no more. So light is more of a reality than a dream. I find their response is unbelievably soulful. I get as much out of reading their work as I do out of listening to a Leonard Cohen album, for instance.
Maggie, this was a teacher we saw elsewhere in the film saying that English was his salvation when he was at school, and he has quite an intense personal style. What did you think of it?
I thought he was very, very committed to the subject, committed to the children that he's teaching, and he's passionate, and I think that passion goes through to the children.
Elaine, what did you think about it?
I can't agree with Maggie more. I really can't, because I think that he's really passionate. If we're seeing more teachers in schools like that, then I think you'll get more productive work from your child. If your child gets on well with the teacher and they can communicate well with the teacher, the production of their work is just so much better.
How important do you think it is for children to be able to express their own emotions in the way that they are in that lesson?
I think it's right and it's fair, and it's very good that a child can express how they feel in class, because if they've got a lot of aggression inside and they can't say that, whether it's in a book or express it in the classroom, then they're going to come out, and somewhere along the lines that aggression will come out.
Simon, did you... One of the things that struck me was he talked about marking at 7 o'clock in the morning. He looked quite... he was obviously passionate about it, but would you worry that he was maybe spending too much time?
I would actually say a lot of work that's being done on assessment with kids is you're better off spending time talking to them about their work than taking the books off in a hole somewhere and marking them for hours on your own. So, I mean, there are different perspectives to that, but I think the time you spend planning is obviously going to be rewarded, because the more time and thought you put into the activities you're doing with the kids, the more they'll get out of it and the more you'll get out of it. I mean,
that's an interesting observation, isn't it? Because we were talking before about the marking, which a lot of parents feel, the kids labour over this homework, it goes in, then you never see a mark. But so what you're saying in a way is that parents may not know that the other feedback was being given to the child.
Well, I think that, what the research about marking says is that the problem is, and it's partly teachers' fault at times, if a kid does a piece of work on a day, gives that work in after homework 2, maybe 3 days later, the next time they see the teacher, gets the book back 2 more days after that, the chances that they're even going to remember what it was that they were set and really the point of the exercise is quite remote. If a child brings a book to a teacher and they've got the time to talk about their work and interact and intervene at the moment the child is doing it, you're much more likely to see an effect on the child's work. So I think that's one area where parents need to be more aware, I think, and need to be told that by the schools, that maybe because your child's book isn't marked for a couple of weeks doesn't mean there's not a very interactive assessment going on in the classroom.
I think that's a really valid point, because we do have that perception, perhaps, that there isn't the communication going on between the teacher and the child. In the front of my daughter's books, she gets a mark for effort and a mark for attainment, a letter for one and a number for the other. And she finds them quite motivating, but I'm not sure that that works the same for all children.
No, it certainly won't. And there's something very dubious about marking people's effort, because you're never quite sure very able kids can put very little effort in,
Yeah.
which can look like they put a lot of effort in, and vice versa. So I think there's something quite iniquitous about those kind of grade schemes.
Yeah.
But I do think teachers aren't that... I mean, I don't think there's been enough information about that kind of assessment agenda to parents, because a lot of the assessment agenda has been driven by tests and tables and results, and that's the kind of the headline stuff, whereas, I mean, there should be a more open debate about what is actually the effective way of marking and assessing a child's work and helping them improve.
Well, we're going to look at this theme a bit more deeply, and we're going to go to Swanley School in East London that is 90% Bangladeshi. And in this extract we see Sangeeta Sharma's Year 7 lesson on the Demon Headmaster that is so engaging she even manages to keep the class going beyond the lunch bell.
Quickly, with the person next to you, want you to vote, or in your group, vote for the one that you thought was the best one, very quickly, and think of one reason.
Can you choose yourself?
No, you can't choose yourself.
I vote for Nahi, but he was doing it really nicely.
Have you thought of yours?
Yeah, I think because of the
All right, 7 in! Quiet. Mukith's group, who did you vote for?
For them, Fazli, Jackie and Bilal.
Why? One reason?
Because the way they were talking.
All right, brilliant. Jahangir?
She Blue and them. Second place I'll put Jackie, and third place I'll put Rashidu and them.
Okay, first place, why?
They were just perfect. They've done it. They got
the criteria on the board. What did they do?
You want
really
more
well?
out of them. You want them to say why. Even at this stage, when it's lunchtime, you're pushing Jahangir to come up with a good reason, to tie it back to the criteria that you started off, getting them to think of.
Okay, good. Enthusiasm and good expression, so well done. All right, well done to everybody today. Help me sort out this room and then you can all go, except for...
I saw that class at their best in that lesson. I'm not just talking about behaviour. It is kind of an issue with this class, their ability to kind of listen to each other and to respond to what each other are saying. And I think they were doing that really well in that lesson. I think I really got to see their imaginations at work for the first time.
Elaine, this lesson was all about teaching talking, and this is all about children assessing themselves and each other. Do you feel that's an effective way for children to learn?
Yes, I do, because it's criticism, but it's positive feedback for the children all the time, and I think it's right that they know what's right, what's wrong. And she asked so many questions to the children, and she kept elaborating on that all the time, things that they wouldn't have thought of asking themselves.
Maggie, do you agree with that, or do you think there's a risk that children could get a bit self-conscious and maybe, dent their confidence?
No, I think it needs to be in a safe environment, and I think she created that, and it was against a set of criteria that they'd all agreed at the beginning of the lesson. She asked them themselves what would be the measure of success, so they all knew that before they started, so they weren't measured against some success that came along later. I think it was all very open and clear and honest, and I think they can take that on board. And I think the other thing that was taught there wasn't just talking, it was the other children were actually listening.
Do you think, Simon, that the way the teacher starts the lesson off and the clear set of objectives that they set, I mean, that's obviously very important. Did she do that well?
Yeah, I think she did that very well. And I think, as you said, that idea that the kids themselves are generating that criteria, that's very important. I mean, a lot of the recent work on assessment says that if children have some sort of ownership about the way they're being assessed, the criteria by which that's working, they're much more likely to understand what it is they're doing, why they're doing it, be able to set themselves their own targets and work with their peers. And I think, the way that teacher set that up was fantastic at the beginning, and the way that it was based on talk, and they were listening, as you say, to each other. And talk is such a valuable thing, particularly, well, in any classroom, but in the English classroom particularly. And they were using drama, and drama gives you that space for a kid, that idea about being self-conscious. When you're doing drama, you're in a role, so it helps those kids who maybe do feel self-conscious to be somebody else for 10 minutes.
Would either of you worry? I mean, Elaine, would you worry about a child who was maybe a bit shy and self-conscious and didn't feel able to take part in the way in a lesson like that they might be disadvantaged by?
No, because I think the class was so open to each other, and they'd worked in groups as well, that it would help bring the shy child out. Any criticism was done within the class rather than it be done in the playground. It was done in a structured environment.
It's a massive skill, a teacher that can do that, because it isn't easy, because you do get shy kids in drama classrooms who feel really under pressure sometimes and feel that the spotlight's on them, and the teacher has to create an environment where they feel safe, and they can do that, and it doesn't happen overnight, and that teacher's obviously worked with that class for a significant time, but that idea that they are setting up their own goals and expectations helps to create that safety, because they feel that they're not being judged by the teacher, they're judging each other.
Do you wish you could see a bit more about what your own children's English lessons are like in the way that you've been able to sort of spy on that one?
Yes, very much so, and I think my daughter's particular school, she has an hour of drama, so I think that would be quite interesting to be a fly on the wall.
Elaine, what do you think?
Yes, I think it would be very interesting indeed to see what goes on in the classroom within my own children's school.
How do you think it would help you?
I don't know if it would help me or frighten me. I just know that through watching these snippets myself, I've had other teenagers browse at them, and I've been amazed at the comments that have come back because it isn't done in their school, and how it would help them if it was done in their school.
Well, let's look at another example now, and in the next programme we're going to visit Hornsey School for Girls in Haringey, London. Here, teacher Sabrina Broadbent is teaching Macbeth to her Year 9 class. In the clip, we see them working in pairs using quotes cut out of the text and asking who said what.
Shall we help you sort out your quotes?
Come what, come may.
Oh, that's a tricky one. It kind of means whatever.
Do you think it could be Macbeth?
I think Macbeth's a very whatever kind of a bloke. OK, Parvinder, I think you're Macbeth. Thank you.
This supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good.
I think it might be Banquo, because Banquo was like the most shocked of when the witches say the prophecy.
My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical.
I think it's Macbeth.
Yeah, I think it's Macbeth as well.
Which is the key word in this? My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical. Murder?
Yeah, but
murder. I know Banquo gets murdered, but he doesn't do murder.
He says it.
Oftentimes, to win us to our harm, the instrument of darkness tells us truth.
Try and work out what it means.
I think it's saying that sometimes the truth can hurt you, and right, it's better to tell a lie.
I think that's absolutely right.
I think it would be Macbeth.
You think it's Macbeth?
It's Macbeth because
well done. Over you go. What's really good about this is that our confusion is part of the play.
Maggie, the students there were not sitting at their desks in lines. They were taking quite an active part in the lesson. What did you think of that?
I think that is brilliant. They're taking the confusion of the quotes and really having to think about, am I stood in the right part of the room? What does this mean? And I thought the way the teacher interacted with them was fantastic. Really good lesson, I thought.
So did you feel again, Elaine, that we were seeing kids really engaged?
You could see that the children participating well, but it makes me wonder how many other schools actually do this. I mean, I know some teenagers, that just can't get the concept of Macbeth, and they just don't understand it.
Mm. It's very, I mean, Shakespeare's very complicated. Even some of us adults find it complicated. Do you think that parents ought to be able to be guaranteed at such a level of teaching like this?
Yes, I do. I mean, you're absolutely right. Not all teaching is like that, and we've seen 3 clips that are, very good English teachers who are clearly passionate about their subject. Shakespeare has to be taught in a Year 9 class because of the SATs test and things like that, and that the problem is that teachers can sometimes feel under pressure to teach in certain ways that actually don't help the children engage with the text at all. You've seen a teacher there who's doing something active, engaging the children's interest, and she's got the confidence to know that that's going to help them learn that play and do well.
Nobody's actually raised the issue of whether children of 13 or 14 should be studying Shakespeare. Well, Elaine, do you think...
To be honest, I was going to ask whether there was other plays and books that the children could read rather than Shakespeare, which would still come within the guidelines of the national curriculum.
I think it's in the national curriculum because of certain literary heritage notions that certain people in suits
Why do you think that? Yeah, I think there is a very traditional view of teaching English, and Shakespeare must be part of it. But would you agree with that?
I would, yeah, but not for those reasons. I think I would say that there is a reason he's been around 400 years, and it's not because he's the establishment, because he wasn't always the establishment. There's a reason that his plays stand out from that time, and it's because of the stories he tells, it's because of the characters that he writes about, it's because, as Johnson said, they're plays for all time. I mean, they are plays that touch people's emotions. The difficulty is we're living in an age where the language has shifted and it's not easily accessible. But then again, some of the language that kids use with each other isn't accessible.
The problem is the SATs test in Year 9 has to have a Shakespeare play in it, which is what Simon's saying. And I think you're questioning that, and I think it is a very interesting question, because I've had the same reaction as a parent, and as an adult who doesn't much like Shakespeare. That this is very inaccessible stuff for a lot of kids, and maybe there would be other ways with some children to learn English.
I mean, I think the problem is, and the teacher you've seen on the video has got around this problem, is you have to teach it because it's statutory and it's a law that's laid down. I would make an argument that I would want to teach Shakespeare for entitlement purposes for kids. The problem comes in school when it becomes dominant because of those SATs tests you've just talked about, and then it becomes taught because they're going to be assessed on it, and not taught because it's actually something that's worth teaching, and let's think about interesting ways to do it. And equally, it shouldn't dominate the English curriculum. It should be a very small part of the English curriculum. English is a massive subject.
It's interesting you've come back to assessment again, and we were talking before about children assessing themselves, teachers assessing pupils and assessing each other, and that's of course the alternative to being driven by tests. I mean, as parents, would you rather see a system that overall was less driven by tests and this sort of rigid, you must do this, and was a bit more fluid and allowed a bit more creativity on the part of the teachers and the students?
I think we need to keep an eye on making sure that we're at the right level with where the kids are at any one time. And I think, as a parent, I think we need to know that how important is the end result, and that we're on the track to get there. But along that way, it's quite nice for them to have some freedom to explore.
OK, well, now we're going to move from English to maths, which is altogether different. And if we couldn't understand Shakespeare, we almost certainly won't be able to understand this. We're going to look at two programmes featuring maths agony aunt Wendy Fortescue Hubbard. The first is about an experiment from the 18th century conducted by a mathematician, Le Comte de Buffon. Teacher Steve Emerson introduces the activity to his Year 9 class.
Although Steve tells them Buffon's story, he leaves the purpose of the experiment a mystery.
You have in front of you a rather blank-looking piece of A3 paper. It has lines carefully spaced. You will find that the lines are exactly one cocktail stick apart.
Students get going on Steve's scaled-down version of the experiment. Working in groups of 3, one person stands with their back to the paper and throws 20 sticks. The others record how the sticks land on the grid. The experiment is repeated 20 times, and each time the roles of the groups are rotated to create more random data.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
They enter their results into a shared computer network. Steve is then able to draw on all their results and put them into Buffon's formula, which is 2n divided by c, to get an estimate of pi.
The totals of the number of times you've been doing this experiment is shown on the left-hand side. Okay? That is the number of sticks you've actually thrown. On the right-hand side is how many times you have been recording the lines being crossed. And the calculation, 2 times n divided by c, shown at the top there, is coming out at the moment at 3.6035 and so on. Okay? If you'd continued this experiment, what eventually do you think the result might have been? Jessie?
Pi.
Elaine, that was an unusual lesson and possibly a bit incomprehensible to some parents. What did you make of it?
I was completely lost with it, I'll be honest. I think a lot of parents are completely lost with maths now. And I think that's why a lot of children can't get help and support when they go home. The children don't understand it when they leave the class, and when they get home the parents don't understand it, so they can't get the support there.
Simon, do you think it matters that parents can't understand these abstract concepts?
Yes, I think so. Well, I mean, certainly because that's where the children are going at night and that's where the support needs to be. And I think maths is an interesting case because I think it's changed radically in the last 10 years and the numeracy strategy's done that. But I think it's done that precisely because too many people of the generation that have now got children don't like maths because their maths teaching at school was dreadful. And it's quite acceptable to go around saying, I can't do maths. You never go around saying, I can't read. That's something you should be ashamed of. But people are quite happy to say I don't like maths, and it's kind of accepted. So there's a massive drive in maths to make it more investigative, more interesting, the kids engaged. But obviously that means that it's very different from people's experience at home, so there does need to be a massive job in communicating what maths is now. Because I was quite good at maths at school. I don't understand that. I could do pi quite happily until the cows come home. I've got an A-level in further maths. I don't get that at all. It's not because I don't know maths, it's because they are using these new methods specifically to try and engage kids. But they are going home to people who don't necessarily understand what the hell's going on, so there's a problem.
I really appreciate that maths needs to be embraced and linked to real life situations. I think that's really important to make it mean something. So if they can come home and because they've been taught a new concept, that actually means something and they're going to be able to do something now that they couldn't do before. And I think that's really, really important.
But Elaine, do you think this is a sort of conflict, though, between parents and children, that parents have been taught it one way, children are being taught it a different way now? The parents want to go back to help them doing it their way, and often they end up arguing about it.
Yes, there's a big conflict, because if you do try and help your child, it's a different method, and then the child ends up so confused they don't know whether they're coming or going. And when they go back into school, the teacher's going up to say, well, you shouldn't have done it that way, you should have done it the way I taught you. But if you don't know that method, then it's very hard to teach a child that method.
Can you envisage a situation where it wouldn't be necessary for children to be supported at home because the entire curriculum would be taught within the school?
I think that's... I don't think that would ever happen, no. I mean, I think that's a kind of... Well, it might be a utopia, I'm not sure. I mean, I think parents want to be involved in their children's education because it's a major part of their lives and it's a major part of them becoming adults and becoming people. So parents would want to be involved in children's education, not simply because the kids can't do it and they want to help them do it, but because they're interested in what's going on and how they're being taught. And I think that's always going to be the case. And I think every piece of educational research shows that parents who are supporting their children do much better in schools.
Well, maths lessons are obviously challenging for parents as well as pupils, but perhaps an example from the real world will help. It's about house prices and shows students trying to understand the difference between three kinds of average.
We found the most median and mean, but we have a problem.
What's your problem?
We found an extra house that's 140,000. It doesn't affect the mode. We've reworked out the
Why doesn't it affect the mode?
Because the mode's
the most precarious,
and there's only the only one of that house. We've redone the mean.
How did you redo the mean?
Well, we got the answer. We multiplied our average by 23 again to get our number. Then we added it on and divided by 24.
Good, right, excellent. That's very good.
23.
And have you redone the median?
No, because we now have an even amount of numbers.
So what do you think you're going to have to do?
Do we have to? I think we have to do it halfway between the two. Right. It can be halfway between.
Okay. Now, guys, once you've got your modes, median and mean, okay. Now look what happens up there. I've got average house price 142,000. How many averages have you got? 3. So which one are you going to use?
When you say an average, most people think of add it all together then divide it by.
Right, so therefore most people are wrong, aren't they? Because you know better now. If I said to somebody who's a statistician like yourselves or like myself, okay, and I said average, what would be your first question?
What average is that?
And that's what I want you to talk about now.
The aims of the lesson for myself were to get the pupils thinking and interpreting the data that they actually collect, rather than them just blindly going through and calculating his means, his medians, his modes, and working out his averages. I want them to think a little bit more about which was the appropriate average to use in certain situations, and to therefore interpret what they were actually doing in the first place.
That was a much more practical example about handling and using data. Did you find that more accessible?
Yes, I did. I thought it was an excellent method that they used, and as the first child said, it'll stay with her for like later on. But it's something that's everyday life. The children themselves will remember that, so it'll become part of history for them as well as learning it within their maths lesson.
Simon, do you think that maths lends itself to these sort of different teaching styles in the way that English does?
Yes, I think it does. I mean, ideas of group work and using oral work and investigative approaches and kinesthetic approaches he was doing the cocktail sticks. I mean, I think the problem that mathematicians have, and we deal with at our university, is it's seen as quite a dry subject, and sometimes you go too far in trying to make it interesting, so that actually it becomes more difficult when you've done it. So I think that example with the breadsticks thing leaves you kind of cold, because I can see what the teacher's trying to do. He's trying to be really, really interesting with it. So the kids enjoy doing it, but I doubt many of them have got a real concept of what pie is at the end of it. Whereas the second teacher there, his approach to making it interesting was to try and make it relevant to them. So they're all going, yeah, hell, £142,000 for a house. So it is sticking in their mind and they're getting the concept. So it's a really fine balance to try and get something that's going to interest and engage, but not be so kind of wacky that it goes beyond actually teaching the point that you're trying to teach. I think that's a challenge in maths, but I do think you can use those approaches.
Do you think at this sort of level that maths ought to be more practical and less conceptual, maybe, for children who maybe aren't going to take it on to a much higher level?
I think it's much easier for children with lower abilities to take it all in when it's on a practical level.
I think it needs to be horses for courses and different levels for different children. And I think that some children learn visually, some other children like to be taught, and I think it's a case of back to the groups again, getting the groups right, and perhaps teaching. It must be very difficult to do, but there must be different ways which could get the same information into the child.
But that would imply a totally different sort of curriculum to the one we're currently teaching.
I think what it would imply more pertinently is a different form of assessment to the one we've currently got, because the problem is you can do all these practical and lovely approaches, and teachers do, and good teachers do it, but if they've got to go and sit an exam and write for an hour and a half at the end of it, that isn't going to help them. You've got to find more imaginative ways to assess what children can do so that they can be rewarded for the skills they've got and encouraged to develop them. And, you know, I think there's some movement there at 14 to 19 to try and say, let's have a more flexible way of assessing children, not just everyone do GCSEs, everybody do AS levels. You've got to find different ways to reward kids and let them flourish in the areas that they do. So I think the teachers want to do that. I think the will is there. I think the big thing that needs to be shifted is the way that children are assessed and the people's understanding of what assessment means.
Well, I think we're back where we started, really, with support for children and parents and assessment, and I think most parents would agree with the comments we've heard from you, but we have to end it there. You can have your say, though, by emailing parents@teachers.tv, and you can find all the information about programmes you've seen and more on our website at Teachers TV, details at the end of the programme. Thanks to my guests on this programme, Maggie, Elaine and Simon.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
And from myself, Fiona Miller, thanks for joining us, and until next time, goodbye.